All right, so are you ready for this? We are diving into Donald Trump's immigration plans if he gets a second term.
Sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, you guys sent in a ton of stuff on this one. We've got like expert analyses and policy documents and news reports. Oh, and even some legal opinions. So today, our goal is to figure out what a Trump presidency could actually mean for immigration. Like, is this all just talk for the campaign? Or is there something more to it?
Well, it's really interesting. We're not just looking at a potential shift in policies, but we're also seeing a pretty dramatic shift in how Americans view immigration in general.
Okay, so what are we seeing exactly?
Well, recent Gallup polls show that 55% of Americans want less immigration.
55%.
Yep, which is a much bigger swing than we even saw after 9/11.
Wow, that's a huge jump. After 9/11, it felt like everything just changed overnight. So to see an even bigger shift now, it really shows you how much this issue is on people's minds.
Exactly. And, this isn't just some political debate. Public opinion actually shapes policy. So this shift towards stricter immigration is going to have a real impact on everything, from jobs to what communities look like.
All right, so we've got this public sentiment leaning towards less immigration. And then Trump comes in with this big promise of mass deportation when he says, all undocumented immigrants. Does he literally mean everybody? What about families who've been here for years and built lives here?
Well, on the surface, that's exactly what he's promising, to deport all 11 million undocumented immigrants in the U.S.
11 million? That's just mind-blowing. How could they even do that?
Well, that's where it gets a little complicated. Legally, it could be a minefield. Trump's team is pointing to laws like the Insurrection Acts and the Alien Enemies Act as justification. But those were designed for wartime, not for times of peace.
Hold on, the Alien Enemies Act, isn't that from like the 1700s? Are we really talking about using a law from 1798 to deport people in 2025?
It sounds crazy, right? But that's what's on the table. And, it's bound to face some serious legal challenges. The Supreme Court has never actually ruled on whether the Alien Enemies Act can be used this way. Even some judges who usually agree with Trump's views have doubts about whether it's even legal.
Okay, so legally speaking, it's shaky. But what about the logistics of it all? Where would they even begin with deporting millions of people?
You're right, it's not just rounding people up.
Yeah.
It would be a massive logistical undertaking. Arrest detention centers, legal proceedings, deportation flights. The costs alone would be astronomical.
Yeah, one of the articles we got put the cost at over $300 billion. That's more than the entire Apollo program.
It's a crazy amount of money. And it just shows the sheer scale of what's being proposed. You have to think about the cost of building and staffing detention centers, hiring more judges and lawyers, arranging transportation for potentially millions of people. And that's not even factoring in the economic impact.
Right, because if you suddenly remove millions of workers from the economy, that's going to affect everything.
Exactly. And we've actually already seen a glimpse of this with Ron DeSantis' immigration crackdown in Florida. Construction worker numbers dropped by 10%, which led to huge increases in construction costs. Now imagine that happening across the whole country.
So we could be talking about labor shortages, price hikes for everyone. It sounds like this could really disrupt everyday life.
It definitely has the potential. And it's not just hypothetical. There's actually a detailed plan in place called Project 2025.
So this isn't just some vague campaign promise. There's a real blueprint for this.
Oh, yeah. And Project 2025 goes way beyond border security. It's a comprehensive plan to reshape pretty much every aspect of immigration policy.
Okay, so what exactly are we talking about? What are some of the key things in this plan?
Well, there are a lot of proposals. Some of them are pretty radical. We could see the end of diversity visas ending birthright citizenship, putting pressure on sanctuary cities, even denying visas to people from countries that refuse to take back deportees.
Wow, this is heavy stuff. It sounds like a fundamental shift in how America approaches immigration.
It is. And if you connect this back to the shift in public opinion we were talking about earlier, it seems like there's a real chance for these kinds of policies to take hold.
It makes you wonder who is really behind all of this. Who are the key figures pushing these proposals?
Well, a few names keep coming up. Stephen Miller, a longtime advisor to Trump. He's known for his hardline stance on immigration. And then there's Tom Homan, the former ICE director. He's been tapped to possibly oversee border security and maybe even manage these mass deportations.
We also read about the Heritage Foundation. They seem to have a lot of influence with the Trump administration.
Yeah, the Heritage Foundation actually played a key role in drafting Project 2025. Their president has talked about this being a potential second American Revolution, which is pretty strong language. It makes you wonder if this is about more than just immigration policy.
That's a chilling thought. So we've got a plan that's bold, expensive, and maybe even illegal. It's backed by some powerful people, and it seems to be tapping into a real shift in public opinion. But can it actually work? That's what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive. Okay, so we've talked about the basics of Trump's immigration plan, and it's a lot to process. But before we get into all the details, has something like this ever been tried before?
It's a good question to ask. Because while it sounds radical, it actually has some parallels to some not-so-great moments in U.S. history.
Oh, you mean like it's actually happened before?
Not quite on this scale, but there have been large-scale deportation efforts in the past. One example that even Trump has mentioned is Operation Wetback.
I have to say that name is just awful. It feels dehumanizing.
Yeah, it is, and it reflects the kind of language that's often used to justify these actions. But putting the name aside, Operation Wetback happened in the 1950s. Over 1 million Mexican immigrants and even some Mexican Americans were deported. And many were treated terribly, almost like prisoners of war.
1 million people deported in a single year. That's a crazy number. And the fact that American citizens were caught up in it is horrifying.
It shows you how these broad approaches to immigration enforcement can go wrong. When you're just focused on numbers, individual rights can get trampled.
And it sounds like Trump might be drawing inspiration from this. One article mentioned that he's actually referenced Operation Wetback and even said he wants to beat the record.
Yeah, it's a disturbing thing to say, and it makes you think, what's really driving these policies? Is it really about border security, or is it something else entirely?
That's a big question. But let's stick with the practical stuff for a minute. Is there any reason to think Trump could actually succeed where other presidents haven't? I mean, the U.S. is a very different place now than it was in the 1950s.
Right, the context is very different. For one thing, the undocumented population is much bigger and more spread out. They're not just concentrated on the border anymore.
So rounding them all up would be a lot harder.
Exactly. Yeah. This wouldn't be a local operation. It would be nationwide. It would need a ton of coordination and resources.
And you mentioned earlier that other countries might not cooperate with taking deportees back.
That's another huge problem.
Yeah.
We've already seen cases where countries like China have refused to take back their citizens. Imagine trying to coordinate this with a country like Haiti, with all its political and economic turmoil. Where would they even send thousands of deportees?
It's starting to feel like this whole plan is just not realistic. It's expensive, logistically challenging, and faces pushback from other countries. But let's say for argument's sake that Trump somehow overcomes all of that. What about the legal challenges? Surely this would end up in court.
Oh, absolutely. And those legal battles could take years. Remember Trump's travel ban? It faced so many legal challenges and revisions before it was even partially put in place.
So even if Trump wins, we could be looking at years of legal fights before any of this actually happens.
That's the reality with any big policy change, especially one as controversial as this. And even if some early challenges are overcome, the opposition isn't going away.
We're already seeing pushback from sanctuary cities, human rights groups, even some members of Trump's own party.
Exactly. And that resistance is only going to get stronger as the human cost of these policies becomes clear. Imagine families being torn apart, businesses struggling without workers' communities losing their neighbors.
It's a pretty bleak picture. It makes you wonder if there's a better way. Is there a way to address border security and the needs of the economy without going to such extremes?
That's a question worth asking. Is mass deportation really the answer? Or is it just a distraction from the real issues at play?
Things like fixing our outdated immigration system, dealing with the reasons people are migrating from Central America, and finding a more humane approach to border security.
Exactly. These are complex challenges that need thoughtful solutions. But those solutions don't always fit neatly into campaign slogans.
So we've looked at the historical context, the logistical hurdles, the legal challenges. It's pretty clear that mass deportation wouldn't be easy or quick. But what about the specifics of Project 2025? What would it mean for people who are already here, both those with and without documentation?
That's what we need to dig into next. Project 2025 isn't just about deportations. It aims to fundamentally change the rules for all immigrants.
All right, so let's get into the specifics of Project 2025. We've talked about these big proposals like mass deportation, but there's a lot more to it than that.
Right, yeah. Project 2025 has a ton of changes, many of which would drastically reduce legal immigration, too.
So it's not just about who gets deported, but who even gets to come here in the first place.
Exactly. One major proposal is to get rid of the diversity visa program.
Just as a refresher, what's that program about?
Right, so the diversity visa program, or the green card lottery, lets people from countries with low immigration rates to the U.S. apply for permanent residency. The goal is to have more diversity in the immigrant population.
And they want to just get rid of it completely.
That's what they're saying. They argue that it's open to fraud and doesn't help the U.S.
Okay, so that's one way legal immigration could be shut down. What else is in this plan?
They also want to cut back on family-based immigration. This is how U.S. citizens and permanent residents can sponsor family members to come here.
But hasn't family reunification always been a big part of American immigration?
It has. But Project 2025 says this system is being abused and needs to be limited. They want to focus on what they call merit-based immigration.
Meaning skills and education over family ties.
Yeah, that's the idea.
This is a huge shift. We're a country built by immigrants, and family has always been a big part of that.
That's true. And these changes really make you think about what kind of country we want to be. Do we value family unity and welcoming people from everywhere? Or are we going for a stricter system based just on skills?
That's a big question with big implications. All right, so limits on diversity visas and family-based immigration. What else?
Well, there's also birthright citizenship.
Right, the idea that anyone born in the U.S. is automatically a citizen. This has been a controversial topic for a while.
It has Project 2025 wants to either change the Constitution to end birthright citizenship or reinterpret the 14th Amendment to exclude children of undocumented immigrants.
Wow, that's a bold move. Birthright citizenship is a core part of American citizenship. Changing that would be huge.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it would definitely lead to a massive legal fight that go all the way to the Supreme Court.
So we're talking about some really far-reaching changes to legal immigration. Would it become harder to immigrate legally, even if you qualify under these new rules?
It's possible. Project 2025 outlines a lot of changes that would make the whole process more complicated, more time-consuming, more expensive. For example, they want in-person interviews for almost every visa category.
Wouldn't that create huge backlogs and delays? We already hear about people waiting years for their visas.
It would make things much worse. They also want to raise filing fees, making it even more expensive to immigrate legally.
It almost sounds like they only want wealthy people to be able to come to the U.S.
It's a valid concern. And remember, these changes wouldn't just affect people trying to immigrate. It would affect people already here, legally. Families trying to reunite students, hoping to study here. Entrepreneurs wanting to start businesses. Everyone would face new challenges and uncertainty.
This is a lot to take in. It seems like Project 2025 wants to completely change American immigration.
That's the impression it gives. It's a wide-ranging plan with potentially huge consequences, both for individuals and the whole country.
So where do we go from here? We've done a deep dive into a really complex and honestly unsettling topic. What advice do you have for our listeners as they process all this and figure out what it means for them?
The most important thing is to stay informed. Read good news sources, follow organizations working on immigration, and talk to your friends and family about what's at stake. The more you understand, the better you can participate in the conversation, and even advocate for policies that you believe in.
That's great advice. What about people who might be directly affected by these changes?
I'd strongly recommend talking to an immigration lawyer. Don't rely on rumors or social media. A good lawyer can give you advice specific to your situation and help you understand your rights and options.
Good advice. This has been a lot to absorb. It's important to remember that we're not just talking about policies. We're talking about real people, families, and the future of our country.
Exactly. These are human stories, and we need to approach these conversations with empathy, understanding, and a commitment to finding solutions that work for everyone.
Well said. Thanks for walking us through this.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another topic. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.